I am joined by three. They're interesting. They are, I would say that they're interesting in the sense that they are traditionalists and they work in quote-unquote traditional media organizations, but they are also a bit radical in their approach to how they are revolutionizing journalism. And so we have Bill Adee from the Tribune, Jay Law from Quartz, and Lou DeMorgan from Forbes, who I always, every time I see Lou, I think Keith Richards. Sorry, Lou.
I'll take it. I'll take it. Is that or Miles Davis? Either one.
You know, a healthy so we want to explore in this in the next 45 minutes kind of how traditional, the day-to-day work of traditional journalists is beginning to change, and how, to some degree, the operational model is changing. So as you kind of begin to equip students to go work in journalism, because I know there's many of your students that still want to go work in journalism, which is great. My first cousin's looking for a job if anyone's hiring. So I'd like to start off with this question of, like, what skills are you hiring for now in your organizations that you weren't, let's just say, a year or two or even 3 years ago?
For me, I would say we've been hiring a lot of folks at the Tribune. I would say they are in the area of at least at a journalism school and sponsored content, social media. I would say journalists who know how to code, another area that we're focused on. So there's a lot of jobs in the business, but they are definitely a lot different than they used to be.
Yeah, I mean, you actually just stole a couple of my words, you know, coders. I think one of the things that we're looking for are people who can operate across disciplines. We're in an industry in which efficiency really matters, right? There's a lot of cost pressure. So if you can get people, journalists, kids who can both write and code, for example, and an example at Quartz I would just give as an illustration is the chart builder tool that we built. So our journalists, the actual writers themselves, created a tool for creating charts and graphs on the fly. They can take data and very quickly port those charts and graphs into their own, writing their own pieces without having to go to a graphics department and another data editor, etc. That's a big get for us. So when we see people who've got those additional skills in addition to the ability to write, I think that's really important to us. And the only other two quick things I'll add before I pass it over to Lou are an understanding and an appreciation of design, and by design I mean big and small d. There's aesthetic design, but there's also understanding of UX, how what you write, what you do fits into the whole user experience. I think is a critical sort of consciousness that maybe didn't exist a year or two ago at the front of our minds. And then lastly, this is not new, but it's actually, we're focusing more deeply on it more recently, this will sound silly maybe here, but the ability to write well. I think one of the distinguishing features, there's such a low barrier of entry in publishing right now, that one of the things, if you take a look at the way Quartz is trying to do its journalism, is one of the things that makes us different is not the design, not the infinite scale, et cetera, but are we doing better, higher quality journalism than theoretically our competitors are? And part of that is writing really well. I think it's a lost art.
Yeah, actually I would agree with that as well, because I still, even if it's to write a coherent email, that is still a skill that is needed, because that can set off a whole bunch of problems too. And if they happen to show up on the website, that's great as well.
Well, I'll get to the writing well part later, but we are actually, I grew up in journalism. Well, when we look for people, we're not really. Is this working?
Yes.
We're really not. I look for journalists who can also start to consider themselves marketers, publishers, promoters, data analysts, and entrepreneurs. And if they're coming to the game as I'm a journalist and that's my identity, well, that's really not going to work for us. You need to understand that in the world today, you're really your own boss and you have to have all those disciplines. When I grew up in this business was like, oh, the PR people will handle that, and the marketing people will handle that. I'm just going to write some words and whatever, but that's just not going to work anymore. So those are the things that we look for. As for the writing part, you know, it's interesting in Forbes because we have a magazine. And certainly writing is critical in the magazine simply because people expect it. It's an experience we want to lean back on and read, and it's a finite space, so you need to be concise. I found on the web what's way more important than great writing is great information, and you need to know how to write a sentence. But structure is somewhat less important on the web, I think, than great information and expertise and knowledge, which can make up for lack of perfect finesse writing. That's my opinion.
I would also, I don't know if we mentioned video, how to put together a story with video, how to edit video, skills that we're looking for.
So are you looking for journalists who know all of these things? So I haven't met a
The world of
coder
journalists.
writer in my life. I mean,
They exist.
But
Yeah, we
on
actually,
what planet? I
we
mean,
have a newsroom full of them, not full of them, but we have a group in the newsroom that got journalism degrees. Usually the coding came first and then the journalism degree, and it works out extremely well. I'm sure these guys agree that, you know, that integration with the people, you know, all together, technology, the content creation is a must in this day and age.
So is there a risk that it becomes like a jack of all trades and a master of none, or do you look for the writing first and hope everything else is there?
I don't think it has to go to jack of all trades, master of none. I think, again, you know, that team I was talking about is 3 people on our, you know, a 20-plus person editorial team. That happens to be their passion. But I think to Lewis's point before, where it's not, you know, the days are gone when you've got, here's my specialization and I hand it off. You know, those days are gone. I think there has to be a level of, I think there's got to be a level of entrepreneurialism. You used the word, I think it's such an overused word, but used it appropriately here, and curiosity that takes you beyond this sort of narrow lane that you're in is the requirement.
You know, about the jack of all trades, I do agree that we have a lot of people who come in. We publish on the WordPress platform. What people can do with the WordPress platform to restyle it and do things, it's like, oh, please don't go that far. But they do because they can. But I think for us, I'm not sure it's the same reports, but for us, the days of the general assignment reporter are over for good. So you need to have a niche, a vertical, a subject, and you need to nail it, understand it, and live and breathe it. This is vastly different from Forbes than 15 years ago, where you could write a banking story one month, and an energy story the next month, and a story about commodity trading the next month. That's finished.
So Lou, if I could just ask you about that approach, because you have, so you're going to very vertical. You have what I would call a pro-am, maybe you'd call it also a pro-am kind of model. You have professional journalists and you have wannabe, and probably close
I
to.
don't know if they want to be or not, actually.
Well,
but
they want to be. I think they want the prestige, not necessarily some of the things that go with the job. But I mean, so I'm curious. Does that model work? How does that model work when you expand out all those beats?
Well, it works wonderfully. Just in 60 seconds, we have built a platform that enables, I'd like to call them knowledgeable experts, or experts in their fields, to publish using the same tools and publishing tools as staff reporters. And what we have 1,300 contributors who publish on the platform. We have about 40 full-time reporters. But what it's enabled us to do, and I was talking to someone about it this morning, our medical reporter, staff reporter, who is well known in the industry, has recruited 40 of the people he most respects to cover the healthcare industry. Some are journalists, some are freelancers, some are former FDA commissioners, some are former pharmaceutical executives. They're all knowledgeable. And the platform has given us the ability to go deep, like we couldn't hire and pay 35 full-time staff reporters writing healthcare. We couldn't do that. But we can have this model for this, and then it goes to healthcare, and gaming, and other kinds of things.
And let's talk about courts. You guys.
Let's do that.
Well, how many of bills do too? I mean, but you know, I find a lot of people are talking about courts, and there's been, and you've come in and you've disrupted a fairly crowded space. What do you think made the difference for you, and why you've been able to scale your property in a year and a half time?
I think it's two things. One is we had the benefit of being born in September of 2012. So all of the data pointed very clearly to embracing the open social web. If you're going to launch an entry into that market space, as you indicated, what we learned and have done is stripped all the barriers away, the friction to discovering and sharing content. And I think that's the first thing that we did. So there's no paywall, there's no reg wall, there's no app to download. It was, build a responsive design site that has app-like behavior. I think that's the first thing that we did that gave us an advantage over some of the sites that we would compete with. Then it gets to the subject of this conversation, which is bringing a team of people on board who Kevin Delaney, our editor-in-chief, would say understand that they're journalists that understand that the future of news will be written in code. So there's something about all of these characteristics we've all just outlined that is the DNA of our entire team. They are building content that is high quality content but made for the social web. And if you do that, if you strip down those barriers, you create content that people want to share. It's got to be good, number one. It's got to be shareable, so it might be the length of the story, it might be whether there are visuals in it. That helps you grow and scale quite quickly. So I think at the heart of it, that's what we've done, is done great content, built it for the social open web.
And you think that's a skill set that you have to cultivate, or you now find that talent? Like the ability to create stories that are social by design?
I think it's a little bit of both. You have some people, classically defined digital natives, an overused term, who came in and I think are the foundational, members of our team from whom others are learning. And we're finding a lot of classically trained journalists. Actually, if you look at the Quartz staff, it is not a bunch of sort of young interns or refugees from BuzzFeed or whatever. It is people from The Economist, The Wall Street Journal, The New York Times, Reuters, Time Magazine, New York Magazine. So these are sort of classically trained journalists, so I think we're feeling suffocated by the institutional muscle memory of a lot of the places that they were working, and they've come over and have learned some of those. Some of it's skill, some of it's mindset. Some of it is, I think, is the things again that we've talked about here, which is creativity, fearlessness, willingness to experiment that we've been able to foster.
And Bill, how is the Tribune as a company changing local news, and it seems like there might be less pressure, competitive pressures, unlike in other sectors that are more wide. You are dominating within a vertical that's local. How are you creating a culture of innovation in the newsroom?
I don't think it's any less competitive than the days when we were duking it out with the Sun-Times, and when I was at the Sun-Times duking it out with the Tribune. It's just a different kind of competition. I think from an innovation standpoint, I think bringing coders into the newsroom and integrating that, done it in small doses, but we're moving even in a bigger way across Tribune. I think Lou and I were talking earlier in Chicago. We created Chicago Now, which has over 400 bloggers, and we were sharing war stories about that, which the creation of which was fairly controversial in 2009. And if you talk about verticals, I think that's where I learned a lot about hyper-local and what that really meant, which was, to me, hyper-local passions, but not news. That it would be very tough to get people to write about a city council meeting in a way that might be acceptable to normal, sort of readers, but that something as crazy as couch surfing or You know, you name the niche you can imagine that we got into in Chicago. But even Cubs or Bears, that there were plenty of experts out there to get what Lou was saying, that are ready to write for us. So I think learned a lot from that experiment, and that kind of still carries through today.
So, over the last few years, the share of the traffic that you're getting from social networks, at least as an industry, but I imagine it's true for all of you, and you by design, has grown exponentially. And I'm interested in this kind of arms race between, mostly between Facebook and the publishers. And then Facebook seems to make a change, and the publishers make a change, and the publishers make a change, and then Facebook makes a change, and it's back and forth. So, how closely, whether it be day to day or month to month even, do you look at the successes of newcomers like the Independent Journal Review, which, by the way, is the 4th most shared news site on Facebook? And I show that to some of our folks, to clients, and they're surprised that a site that is so leaning one way is able to come along and generate so much traffic, or Upworthy, or all these other different sites. So, how much do you pay attention to those kind of tricks that are emerging?
I don't pay attention at all.
You run your own race.
Yeah, I don't. We certainly spend a fair amount of time keeping up with Google and what Google does, but I don't watch. I don't know what the changes in the Facebook algorithm. I don't pay attention to it all.
Why?
Why?
Yeah.
So yeah, why
That's a great
not?
question.
Well,
Thank you.
Don't worry.
because I just feel in the end, Google does things, but if you're creating credible content that people want, that's the best thing.
But you worry about Google, not Facebook?
Because Google is our search traffic is probably 35% of our traffic. Facebook is not. It just isn't.
You're in an anomaly there, though, are you not?
In terms of Facebook?
In terms of Google representing that.
Well, it's interesting because I don't know how exactly. I mean, we certainly optimized our platform for Google. I think it has to do with. There's a statistic that I think is pretty shocking. At least people seem to be shocked. 51% of our traffic any given month goes to long tail content that's 30 days or older, and that was 15% 4 years ago. That's great for our business, but a lot of that has to do with the type of content that we have that's searchable and exposable, and that social is more about current kind of thing. So we pay attention to LinkedIn.
Yeah, I would probably answer the question the same way, but maybe for a slightly different reason. I've just met so many sort of vendors who relied on Facebook that got the rug pulled out from under them, that I guess I would have a hard time putting a business model around Facebook. I think we certainly teach best practices and sharing, your content with your followers or your friends or whatever, but we don't rely on that traffic like some other big companies do.
I think that's it for us. I think you have to be paying attention to what they're doing. We spend a lot of time talking to these organizations to understand what changes are coming down the pike, or with LinkedIn, which is changing all the time. It used to be having a relationship with their editorial people, could make a difference. But I think it's as much to just stay informed about what's going on as it is to determine what you're actually going to do. To your point, you can't put all your eggs in that basket. They change the algorithm, and suddenly your traffic model is shot to hell.
Last part on this. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want to say that?
I want to talk about Facebook in another context.
Oh, okay. I mean, I've actually said I've actually asked Facebook if they're going to plan a warning system of some kind, because I feel like that if they change the algorithm, that you guys, the entire business is going to be wiped out on the media side.
The thing that scares me the most about Facebook is the mobile traffic that it drives. We have a post that's running right now that's got like 150,000 Facebook shares, and the amount of traffic coming in through smartphones is double desktop. And if you're trying to run a business, that's a tough way to make a business when most of it's coming in through a little screen like that.
Let's segue to mobile. You know, all the data says that more of the consumption now is going to go through mobile. We saw some data this morning, and I think that mobile's lumped together, tablet and phone, but the phone part is probably more disruptive there. So how is that changing? Does that put more focus on your journalists and for you to be a powerful brand that people seek out? And does it put more pressure on you to think about surface area across the mobile ecosystem?
I mean, I think it puts less pressure on us to be something that people seek out, because I think mobile is one of the things that's actually driving social discovery. The reason so much of our traffic is coming in through side doors today is you think about your habit on a phone, right? You're being pointed probably to the stuff you read through email, through newsletters that you're getting, through text messages, and you're clicking all these different links. I think it's less about me trying to get somebody to type qz.com into their phone browser than it is optimizing for that, number one. Number two, that's, I guess, what I meant when I go back to having people, journalists who come out of school, understanding both social, you said it earlier, Bill, but also design, and again, I use both big and little d design. Having an understanding of how what you're doing renders on that small screen and what the user experience is critical. Maybe you don't want to traffic in 10,000 word articles if tons of it's coming in on the phone. Now, it doesn't mean that people aren't reading long form on the phone. I do all the time. I save stuff to Pocket and I read on it, but that's a lot of scrolling. And so I think that's
right.
How we think about it.
For this crowd, I would say, the thing that I have to remind the newsrooms that I talk to is look at it on a phone. Okay, so many journalists tend to look at things on a desktop and sort of eye it up like this, like they used to in the print. And I'm like, okay, great. Now look at a phone. It looks jacked up. And so, that's, hey, great graphic. Doesn't work on my phone though, so why are we doing it when half of our traffic's coming from mobile? So I think that's what I carry away from the mobile, is to get people in that mindset.
I agree with Jay. I mean, I'm starting to read books on my phone, but I think the larger question is, we do cover stories in Rose Magazine and do well online, but what's a cover story on a smartphone? It's not, it isn't necessarily 3,000 straight words, nor is it necessarily a few screens in a photo. It's probably some, I don't have an answer for it, but we're thinking about what is a cover story on a smartphone.
So we had a panel earlier today on sponsored content, native advertising, more from the publisher perspective. I know Jay, you kind of do multiple hats, but how do you manage? Let me ask quick. What's the attitude of the newsroom journalists, your on-staff people, towards sponsored content, both good and not so good?
They're good and bad reactions, or
how do you manage the newsroom's ability to like sponsored content as a future revenue model?
So this is again, I think, a benefit of having started a culture in 2012. So we have not, unlike a lot of the entrenched legacy players, and I don't say legacy in a negative sense there. So let's talk about the New York Times and the study that was just sort of revealed by BuzzFeed. I subscribe to the New York Times, I read it every day, I love the New York Times. They have a lot of institutional barriers to break down. We've not had that. Our editors actually, they don't touch the sponsored content, they don't want to get involved in it, they don't judge it, they don't advise it, they don't write it. But what they want actually is for it to be as good as the editorial content, because they think it reflects well on them and it's the kind of thing that's going to help us monetize. I'll give you one quick example. We did a program for Bank of America that was tied to Davos, the World Economic Forum, and Kevin Delaney, our editor-in-chief, was reporting from Davos and posting from there. And he was looking at Chartbeat every day. If you guys all know what Chartbeat is, you can track what the hottest stories are on the site and how many people are on the site at any given time. He woke up in the morning in Davos and he noticed somebody had posted a story about Davos that was outperforming his story. He looked at Chartbeat, it was one of our native content pieces for Bank of America. And the note I got from Kevin, and I've worked in places where the note would have been, we need to shut this down, like you guys need to, to sequester this more. He sent a congratulatory note to our marketing team. Hey, you guys are actually beating the editor-in-chief here, bravo. And I think what it is, the whole thing is about, and Richard is a proponent of this, is raising the standards on the business and editorial sides to something that the brand can be proud of. Period. That seems it to me.
Yeah, I would say, having dealt with it at the Tribune, I oversee, actually I run a publishing group for Tribune, so I'm experiencing it. It really is about communicating what we're actually trying to do. It's about having people, the newsroom, trust, overseeing the efforts, including very good lawyers who have become very good experts at sponsored content, what we're dealing with there. And so, so far so good for us.
Dr. Dvorkin?
Well, I will take this in a different direction, but when we started this in 2010, before most people did, and to be very honest, it was a very difficult time at Forbes, and there had been a lot of layoffs, a lot of changes. 2008, 2009, I got there in 2010, and we said we were going to do this, and we said this is a great opportunity to find a new source of revenue to make sure people have jobs, frankly. And people knew that if you keep digging the same hole, likely you weren't going to get out. So we started to dig a different hole. So people just said, great, let's go for it. My personal experience with native advertising, because I have this odd role, but I worry about the ad agencies, quite frankly, because I deal with a lot of this, and we run native advertising in print, and whenever you get content and ad agencies get a hold of it, oh, there you go. It turns out to be a message, not something authentic. But when the client is actually doing it, it actually is pretty good. So it's an agency issue as far as I'm concerned.
That this morning. So last question before I open it up is, where do you see journalism going in 3 to 5 years? What will be different in 3 to 5 years from today? The way journalists do their jobs. I like how I just gave it to you.
You're more than that.
Well, I do think, we'll be looking for more in video at the Tribune. So I think that's an area that we need to address more and more. So I think being able to tell the tale, journalistic fashion, in a way that matches up with what the Chicago Tribune is or what the LA Times is, I think is kind of one of those challenges that will be taken on. So that I would kind of go there. I think the need for coders who know journalism and vice versa, I mean, I think it will get more intertwined, and that'll just be, it won't be looked at as somebody wearing multiple hats. That's what they are.
Yeah, I don't even know if I can really answer that. It's hard for me to predict what it'll be 6 months from now or a year from now, rather than forget 3 to 5 years from now. But I think it is some of that. I think it is adding to the skill set beyond just writing is partly what journalism looks like. And then I also maybe have sort of this childlike faith that in the wisdom of crowds, that I think that there have been 1,000 flowers that have bloomed, and it feels like there's this low barrier of entry. But I do think people care about quality, and what I hope in 3 to 5 years you'll see is that there are a bunch of dead flowers, maybe laying around the field, and the ones that are still standing strong matter for whatever reason, and that can be. Use BuzzFeed as a poster child for this stuff all the time. That could be BuzzFeed, who does what it does really, really well and makes no bones about what that is, and that's valid, and that's a high quality version of that. And it might be something like what Forbes does or the Chicago Tribune does, but I think there might be less of it and a better, higher quality of it.
Well, I think they're going to be paid differently, frankly. I think the journalist who's accustomed to a salary is going to find a whole different life in 5 years. And I think it has to do with the incentives and entrepreneurial qualities. I mean, when you're talking about a world of 75% of your content being read on a smartphone, you're talking about a different economic model. And the economic model of the newsroom is going to have to change. That doesn't mean you're not going to have great journalism, because that's what matters, but you're going to have to figure out a different way to pay for great journalism, and it's going to change how they're paid.
I would say the other thing we sort of touched on is the speed. I mean, to predict what things would be like 5 years ago, or 5 years from now, would be it's nuts. Kind of go quarter by quarter almost, and you know, that's a huge challenge. When I meet somebody who's dropped out of the business for after about 8 weeks, they're clueless. I mean, things move that quickly. The vendors are changing, Facebook's algorithm's changing, and you look at them and you're like, oh, you know, yeah, I can't even relate to you. You know, you've been out 8 weeks, so maybe it's not that bad. But I think you know what I mean.
So don't have a baby in journalism.
That's 4 weeks.
Questions from the group? Oh, here.
Yeah, you're talking about, you know, reinventing traditional media, but we're still talking about the journalists, and I get the impression from you is that model is we're going to continue to have fewer and fewer full-time journalists in the newsroom, and we're going to continue to rely more and more on quote-unquote freelancers, because you can cherry-pick various expertise. For example, Forbes, you say you have 1,300 contributors, because then you can cherry-pick exactly what to cover. So do you see the model that you're talking about is that we're going to have all these freelance journalists having to survive in the world without a full-time job?
Look, that's a model that works. There are many different models. Quartz has a model, many newspapers have a model, we have a model, and I think that's what you're going to see over the next 4 or 5 years is people. The model for journalism that we're used to is not going to survive, so there are going to be new models. And we're one, and it works for us. I'm not saying it works for everybody else.
I think what's an interesting experiment right now is you've got a lot of you know, A-list journalists, Ezra Klein, you know, Nate Silver, if you want to call him a journalist, for example, Andrew Sullivan, who have said, I'm going to forgo the institution largely and create my own brand. I think it's going to be a tough row for them to hoe in terms of actually running a business. So it'll be interesting to see, you know, which one of them, you know, how many of them survive. I frankly root for them. I'm a fan of, you know, high-end journalism, as I've said before. So I kind of root for them to have some of these experiments work. And I think that'll be interesting to see where this nets out in a year or two and whether there's a model there.
They should watch Andrew Sullivan, because that's interesting what he's done.
Yeah.
You know, he's
a unicorn though. So.
Yeah, he is, but he has built a subscriber business that, I guess, I forget, what did he get, like 800,000? I forget what it was.
It's like about he's got
million revenue or
something like that.
And he's got a loyal following. It's small. There are going to be a lot of little small businesses out there that can do really great content, I think.
But sorry.
No. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, in addition to, separate from that, I do think, yeah, the hard reality is, yeah, there are going to be a lot of journalists who you said, as you were saying, are going to find that it's going to be a very difficult way to make a living. You're not going to get your sinecure at the, you know, at the New York Times for 30 years anymore.
I think the area that I would, sort of how I would answer it is, I think sort of defining journalism is, will get a little tighter, right? Like I think there's always going to be a place for watchdog investigative journalism. But growing up in the newspaper business, right, we had journalists, people who were trained and maybe came up through the city desk, and then they'd end up in the features department writing about cooking or grilling, right? I don't think there's probably room for that, right? Because you have a model like they have in Forbes where an expert in grilling can express themselves freely and we can find it. Or even a brand that is an expert in grilling can write about grilling. And I think we're at the point where users, readers, they can understand that that's expertise it probably doesn't need journalism. It needs to be true. It needs to be transparent what their interests are, but it's maybe not journalism like it used to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You know, I mentioned before, I'm reading the book The Powers That Be, which is about old 20th century media moguls, but we may have some new media moguls doing things very differently, with names like Jeff Bezos and Pierre Omidyar. You know, they're not going to do things the way Luce and the Chandlers did it, and they may be able to find different models, and because they have the money to go forever if they choose, and there are others like them.
Question here.
Yeah, in a few weeks, I'm going to have a fresh crop of freshmen sitting down in their seats in the PR, both PR and journalism classes. And most of us who are in that position do have to think about 5 years from now. I mean, we appreciate the fact that it's going to change every 8 weeks, but at the same time, we're advising students to take courses and study subjects that may or may not apply. My question is really specific. Do you really think that in the next 5 years, as these matriculating students graduate, that there will not be apps for a lot of, especially given what you said about mobile phones dominating, that most of what they will need coding for will be achievable through very simplified apps or an interface? In other words, why should I send them to the internet department to take those courses if in the time frame we're talking about, they're not going to really need that coding?
Here's why I would have them do that.
Mm-hmm.
Because they need to understand what the process is. The end result will change in 5 years, but they need to know what the process is. They need to know the basics. I mean, that's what's possible, right? I still have it where, you know, my coders will be working with a bunch of some journalists in the newsroom, and at the very last second, somebody will come up and say, "Could you make this do that instead of this?" And the coders, right, will be like, "Oh my," you know, they'll be ready to slit their throats in the newsroom, right? And if you had some background, you wouldn't ask that question, right? You'd know that there was a process. Every week you saw it, you could have changed it, you could have said something in an agile development area. So that's why, to get the basics. I don't know, guys.
You know, I think you're 100% right. Now, you don't have to have everybody go out and learn the Fortran version of coding necessarily, but I do think, to your point, just some exposure to it. And the other kind of thing, so let's say you're not predisposed to learning that kind of technology. I would not have been when I was in college necessarily. But I would say then use other mechanisms that are maybe a little bit in a tighter lane. You know, Medium, for example, there are all kinds of publishing platforms. I assume that you guys are all doing this. If you're not, these guys should be out there actively publishing and trying to see if they can aggregate audiences across social media. Just actually being in the thick of it and doing it, to me, is important. I get a lot of sort of, wide-eyed kids who come out and have not even done that, and it's kind of staggering to me when I see that.
But actually, blogging is a good example. I mean,
Sure.
blogging is, there's an app for that, and intensive coding. I mean, if WordPress exists, why do I have to know the machine code to create a blog?
I don't think every one of them has to know, but I would encourage the ones who want to do it for the exact reasons Bill said.
One last question.
So the New York Times is looking like it's trying a monetary model. The Washington Post will try a different model with Bezos, and then Chicago Tribune is spinning off a newspaper group. Is digital going to go with the newspaper group, or stay with Tribune Broadcasting, or loosely kind of affiliate with all of them? Bill's
Do you need a PR answer for that? We can give you one.
I do, actually.
Yeah.
I believe I can answer whatever's been published, and it has been published that Tribune Publishing will spin off from Tribune Company, and in Tribune Publishing will be our 8 markets that publish newspapers and websites, and that is what will happen at some point,
Soon.
period.
Stevie, one last question. Yeah, I promise.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not gonna say no. I'll let everyone else ask questions.
Can you describe the economic model that you would use to work with a Chevron or work with a SAP, or from a business standpoint, how does it work? Let's be tangible with these guys, so they understand.
You mean by economic model?
For sponsored content, for, you know, for native, however you want to describe it.
Sure. Do you want to go first?
I'll go second, go ahead.
Okay. Specifically on native content, I mean, it's different in every case. So the question was, you know, what's the economic model for if I'm working with Chevron, for example, exactly on custom content. I mean, to break that down, the taxonomy of that is Chevron's got a complicated, you know, sort of complex story to tell that can't be done just through display advertising. They've got a lot of intellectual capital that they want to get out there. And so they will come to us and say, this is what we want to do, we've seen your bulletin product, we're interested in it. One of two things happens. They will either have a lot of close to finished product with their own internal writing staff or their PR firms, or they'll have a lot of raw material in the form of white papers, videos, that is all sequestered on their website that for years they've been trying to get you to go to chevron.com and watch, and nobody does, and nobody ever will. And they will say, help us make sense of this, help us serialize this into something that is going to be interesting and digestible for your audience. My marketing team will then sit with those folks and brainstorm and basically think of themselves as editors. They'll do the storytelling, there'll be approval processes that Chevron can go through to make sure that we're meeting compliance issues, that we're not hitting any sort of third rails on you know, PR or reputational issues they may be concerned with, and eventually we publish it. Not once in that process does an editor on our team get involved, probably doesn't even know that we're talking to Chevron. And from there we just continue to iterate. We do a lot of data gathering on what's working, what's not. Do videos work in this case? Do interactive infographics work better? Is the written word working? We hard code that. We publish that on the CMS, so it's hard coded. It's a part of the web. It's linkable, shareable, findable, like any other piece of content. Is that what you were looking for? And then the model for us in that instance, which is out there, is then the money. Yep. It's so if you're going to for us with custom content, it's a finite inventory on that. It's not like I can just keep pumping that out. It'd be a barrage for our readership. So we have minimum spends that get into the 6 figures, which is not the case necessarily for display advertising. And in our case, we charge a CPM model, a cost per thousand model, if you guys know what that is, which is different from other formats, and it's at quite a premium price. The performance justifies it. So hopefully that gives you what you were looking for there.
We it's called Brand Voice, and it's based on the philosophical belief that all content is equal as long as it's fully labeled. So that means that we build the publishing tools that our staffers use, our contributors use, and marketers who are part of the program use the exact same tools. They have a homepage like I have a homepage. They publish an article page like I publish an article page. Their content can appear in search, the most popular module, like a contributor. It's all organic, it's all equal. Most of our Brand Voice partners are sophisticated and have already built editorial teams, and they do the work. They hit the publishing button all by themselves. For those who haven't, we built a team, an editorial, a Brand Voice news desk that is separate and reports to the Chief Revenue Officer. The editorial operations report to me. So that brand desk would work with advertisers who need help in publishing and content creation and that kind of thing. So that's how we do it. Now, we charge we have 2 programs. One's called Always On, where you're paying a very significant monthly fee that totals hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars over 4 or 6 months. And you can publish at will, anytime you want, 24 hours a day from Tahiti, from wherever you are, a marketer can publish. We also have another program that's more on a story basis. So for a certain amount of money, you get to publish 4 stories a month or something like that. And all that's done is, just like Jay said, the editorial operations have nothing to do with it. I have this unique role where I don't know what I am, but I cross both business and editorial. So that's why I know about all this. Plus, it was my started all this 6 years ago. So. And Richard first wrote about it, I might add.
We could go on forever, sorry. I have to wrap up, I'm told I have to wrap up the panel, so thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.